Tom, I was thinking. Those words hit like a wrecking ball. There are certain phrases every married man knows too well, and I was thinking, ranks right up there with "honey, we need to talk," which we all know never leads to good news. Then there's the classic, "Do you think this dress looks good on me?" That one is always a trap. There is no right answer. Either you lie and say, "You look stunning," or you try to be honest and prepare to face the fallout. And of course, there are the sneaky lines like, "If you love me." That phrase is just a polite way of saying she knows you'll resist whatever it is, but she's counting on your guilt to do it anyway. Or, "I did it for you," which really means she's asking for a big favor but wants you to focus on the selfless thing she did first. My personal favorite has to be, "It's worth your attention." Usually, that comes paired with some well-placed cleavage or a brush of her hand on your arm, something to sweeten the deal. But back to Tom, I was thinking, you can try to dodge it with humor, like saying, "Congratulations, honey, there's a first time for everything." But I learned long ago that sleeping on the couch isn't worth a cheap joke. So this time, I kept my mouth shut. I should have spoken up, though her big idea almost killed any chance of me wanting to get anywhere near her that night. Now let me explain. My wife, Sarah, and I have been married for 25 years. Life has been good to us. Our kids are grown, the bills are paid, and we're doing fine financially. The thing is, even with everything going so smoothly, it feels like we're stuck in a rut. Every day is the same. Wake up, work, come home, make dinner, kiss goodnight, go to bed. Rinse and repeat. Somewhere in there, the excitement of life just disappeared. So, in a moment of inspiration, I suggested we do something new. Something exciting to shake things up. I started small. How about we take weekend trips? Day trips to nearby towns or parks. You love ballet, we could get season tickets. Or maybe go to some baseball games, you know how much I enjoy that. What about buying a boat or a motorcycle? We could take tennis lessons, maybe try ballroom dancing. Heck, we could even join a bowling league or visit those gardens you always wanted to see. I tossed out ideas left and right, hoping one would stick. These were things we had dreamed about doing over the years but never found time for. Figured, why not now? We finally have the freedom to enjoy life. But Sarah shot down every single idea like they were incoming missiles. Nothing worked. Not ballet, not baseball, not motorcycles. I was striking out fast. Frustrated, I half joked, "Well, if none of that works for you, how about this? Instead of kissing goodnight every night and having sex once every other week, why don't we switch it up? Let's have sex every night and kiss goodnight once every 2 weeks." I laughed to show I was kidding. Mostly, Sarah didn't laugh. She gave me a look that was part shock, part serious consideration, and then said, "Tom, we are 48 years old, and we have not even managed to have sex once every 2 weeks. I know you want more, but honestly, it's just so boring." Wait, boring? I sat there, completely stunned. Felt like I had just been hit with a frying pan. Before I could say anything, Sarah sighed and continued, "You are the only man I have ever loved, Tom. I do not want to upset you, and I need you to listen to me carefully. You are also the only man I have ever been with, and, well, that makes me curious. I start to wonder what else is out there." It was like time stopped. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, had just said she wondered about other men. And she added, "Jessica says." There it was. Jessica. The name alone made my jaw tighten. I should have known Jessica would be involved somehow. I could have seen it coming a mile away. Jessica. She was the definition of wild. Fun, sure, but wild. The kind of woman who said yes to anything involving nudity or intimacy, no hesitation. Jessica was 6 months away from her third marriage, already scouting around for the next poor guy to add to her collection. She had a system: marry, divorce, cash in. It worked for her. By then, she had a charming 5-acre property near the golf club, a fat bank account, and 3 kids. Each one had a different dad, all of them paying hefty child support. Jessica was the type who had been to every nude beach you could name, both in the States and abroad. She knew the best cruises, the hottest clubs, and the craziest adventures. She was the woman who could show up to a church potluck in 6-inch heels and a dress that barely covered anything, and no one would even blink. That was just Jessica. She oozed passion. And of course, she was my wife Sarah's best friend. So when Sarah said, "I'd be very wrong not to try with other men before it's too late," I felt my heart drop into my stomach. Her next words were worse. "I think you should start dating Jessica on Fridays. Explore her world. It is the perfect time before I start looking old and saggy. With the kids out of the house, no one will get hurt." No one will get hurt. Yeah, right. I had to fight to keep my dinner down. "Sarah, what about me?" I managed to say, my voice tight. "Oh, Tom, do not worry. Jessica said you might get jealous. But remember, I only love you, and I always will. You had plenty of experiences before we met, so you already know what that world is like. I only know you. I deserve the chance to try a different flavor." I looked at her, my mind racing. "Sarah, what if you like one of these guys so much you do not come back? What if you fall in love with someone else? What happens to me? To us? We have spent our lives building a good life. The kids are grown, we are about to retire, and we can finally travel, explore, and do things together. These should be our golden years. What is in this for me?" She frowned, shaking her head. "You do not understand. I do not want to divorce you. I never want to leave you. I want those golden years too. Jessica says I could come out of this with a couple of divorces under my belt and a nice payday. But I cannot imagine growing old without you." I stared at her, realizing she had already thought this through. Sarah always did. So I took the only logical step I could think of. I called Chris. Chris was my law partner. Together, we ran a small, well-respected law firm, nothing flashy, but solid. We gave general legal advice and dabbled in just about everything. Chris was sharp, and I trusted her completely. I asked her to draft a contract outlining exactly what would happen if Sarah and I ended up divorced. Not that I wanted a divorce, far from it, but I needed something in writing just in case. The contract was clean and fair. Sarah would keep the house and everything in it. I would get our winter condo, the beach house, and my fishing cabin. Financially, it was all even. Sarah earned a good salary, and we had always kept our accounts separate. The mortgage was paid off 2 years ago, so there would be no spousal support. The kids' college funds were fully covered, so that was not a problem either. It was all very neat, very tidy. Chris, as usual, had done an excellent job. But as I read through the pages, I started to wonder about a few things. Why had Chris not warned me about Sarah's request? Did client confidentiality really cover this? After all, Chris and I were not just colleagues, we were partners. Did that not count as a conflict of interest? For a moment, I thought about pushing the issue. Then I let it go. Chris was also my lawyer in this mess, so I figured I would give her the benefit of the doubt. Besides, maybe I owed her lunch or even dinner for handling it so well. Thinking about Chris made me pause. She flirted with me constantly. So did our clients. So did the neighbors. Hell, even women at the club did it. And let's not forget Jessica. She practically propositioned me right in front of Sarah more than once. So now, my wife wanted to explore other men? Fine, let her. If she wanted to see what else was out there, I would let her play. I just was not sure she realized what she had done by throwing me into a playing field so full of opportunities. I do not think Sarah realized what Chris had done with that contract. It was so perfectly worded that it left the door wide open for me too. When I signed my name just below Sarah's, I did it with a grin, like a cat that got into the cream. Without a word, I handed her a copy, locked mine away in my file cabinet, and said calmly, "Okay, honey, you are a free woman now. Play as you wish. I just ask for 2 things. Do not bring anyone into our bedroom. That space is sacred, it stays just for you and me. And second, no slippery seconds. I want a full 48 hours between your last night with someone and our next time together. That is only fair." Sarah hesitated, looking at me as if she were trying to gauge how serious I was. Finally, she said softly, "That is fair, Teddy. I like that. But remember, we are not just going to have sex. We are going to make love." I shook my head.
No, Sarah.
Making love is for 2 people who love each other, and it only happens between them. If you start making love with someone else, then it is over for us. From that point, it is just sex, nothing more. She frowned. Teddy, you are wrong. Part of the cuckolding lifestyle is the romance of it. When a woman comes back home and makes love to her husband, it is a way to show how much he means to her. Slippery seconds are even a part of that. You need to understand that letting me explore with other men, knowing I will come back to you, is the ultimate way to show your love for me. I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. Cuckolding culture?
Sara, no.
That is not going to happen. You need to read that contract of yours again. It says nothing about me signing up to be some cuckold. You want to know what a cuckold is? It is a man who lets his wife sleep with other men while he stays home, loyal and waiting like a fool. Sorry, honey, I cannot stomach that. In fact, I almost lost my lunch just hearing you suggest it. The truth is, Sarah, I do not want to share you with anyone. I have no interest in watching you or hearing about you with other men. That contract describes an open marriage. That means we are both free to do whatever we want with whoever we want. No strings attached. Sarah grabbed the contract and read through it carefully. As she flipped through the pages, her shoulders started to slump. She realized what she had done. The seed of curiosity she had planted was already growing out of control. She could not take it back now. I could see it on her face. She was considering dropping the whole thing right then and there, but she could not. That curiosity had sunk its claws in too deep. If she did not go through with this, she knew she would eventually cheat on me. But now the tables had turned. For the first time, I had something to lose too. She knew I could step out into the world just as easily, and there was no guarantee I would come back. The doorbell rang, breaking the tension. Sarah stood up quickly, eager to escape the conversation. I followed her to the door. When she opened it, there stood Jessica, smiling like she had just walked into a surprise party. So, he agreed? Jessica asked, her eyes flicking from Sarah to me. Sarah gave me a nervous look. Jessica turned toward me, and before she could say a word, I cut her off. So, Jessica, you were taking my wife every Friday night, huh? Jessica's smile faltered. She probably expected me to lose my mind, yell, or throw a tantrum. Instead, I kept my face calm. Here is the deal, Jessica. If you have Fridays, I get Sundays. Both women froze. Jessica's eyes went wide, and Sarah just stood there, stunned. Without waiting for a reply, I stepped toward Jessica, took her face gently in my hands, and kissed her. Slow, deep, and full of passion. I did not even glance at Sarah. Instead, I scooped Jessica into my arms and carried her into my office. There, I bent her over the arm of my leather sofa and did what I had imagined doing for years. For 2 hours, we devoured each other like starving animals. Jessica was loud, and I mean loud. Less than an hour into it, I heard Sarah's car start up and drive off. I did not care. By the time Sarah returned that evening, Jessica had already showered, dressed, and was sitting outside with me as I grilled steaks on the barbecue. Dinner was quiet, at least for Sarah. She barely said a word, while Jessica and I shared easy conversation, tender smiles, and little touches here and there. When it was time for Jessica to leave, I kissed her just as passionately as before. Tender, warm, the kind of kiss that melts a woman. See you next Sunday, dear, I said with a grin. Jessica smiled back and replied, maybe, you never know. Maybe you will have a date on Friday. I laughed, waved her off, and turned to watch the Sunday game. Behind me, I could hear Sarah in the kitchen, washing dishes. I glanced back just in time to see her shoulders shaking as she cried quietly into the sink. That night, when we were in bed, Sarah turned to me, searching my face. Her voice broke as she whispered, Teddy. I knew what she wanted, but I shook my head.
No, Sara.
48 hours. That is the deal, remember? She turned her back to me, crying softly into her pillow. Me? I slept like a baby. That night, as Sarah turned away from me crying, I wrapped my arms around her, but she wanted more. I reminded her, it has not been 48 hours yet. We agreed no slippery seconds. She turned her back, sobbing quietly until morning. Unlike her, I slept soundly, like a man who had no worries in the world. Monday morning rolled around like it always did. Sarah left early for work. She was a real estate agent, and as they say, the early bird gets the worm. Just like every other morning, she left me a cup of coffee, a full breakfast, and the newspaper on the table. Everything was exactly as it had always been. The only difference? The grin I could not wipe off my face. I had to give my wife some credit. A little bit of excitement, let's call it marital chaos, had woken something up in me. I still loved her, no doubt about that, but Jessica was something else. She was skilled, passionate, and she knew how to handle a man. But even after all that, nothing compared to making love to a woman who was mine, and mine alone. As always, Chris greeted me with a huge smile when I walked into the office. She could tell something was up the moment she saw me. When I told her the full story, Jessica, the contract, everything, she burst out laughing like a teenager and said, "Teddy, I knew you would understand why I left that little clause in there." Chris loved the whole 48-hour rule and how I had kept the marriage bed sacred. Then, almost casually, I invited her to dinner. "Only if we go to my place," she teased. That night, we had the kind of dinner you remember for years, perfect steaks, decadent desserts, and just the right wine to make everything flow smoothly. And Chris was a firecracker. By the time we made it to her bedroom, she was all over me. Afterwards, as we lay there catching our breath, she turned to me with a smile and whispered, "I have wanted this for years, but you were married and I respected that. I know you love Sarah, but when she threw this insane idea out there, I had to take my chance. Maybe Chris, but if Sarah keeps playing games, she might not have anyone to come back to." Chris kissed me again and laughed softly. "If she loses you, Teddy, I am first in line. You are too good to let go." When I got home, Sarah was already asleep. I showered and settled into the guest room. The next morning, she was waiting for me at breakfast. "Teddy," she said quietly, "Jessica told me something. She said you were the best she has ever had." I shrugged and took a sip of my coffee. Funny, I thought the night got boring. There were times I just wanted to finish up and call it quits. Sarah's face fell. She told me I was an idiot. She said if I lose you, she will make you hers, even if it costs her everything in a divorce. "Teddy, can we stop this? This was really stupid. I cannot stand the thought of you with Jessica." I looked at her calmly. "Sarah, you started this. You had a desire you could not control and you acted on it. That desire will come back again. If you do not get this out of your system, you will cheat on me sooner or later. So go ahead, get your samples. Finish this. If at the end of the month you still want me, we can start fresh. But I will warn you, if you cheat after this experiment, I will use that contract against you, and it will hit you like a hammer." Sarah reluctantly agreed. That night, she tried to reach for me again, but I stopped her. "It has not been 48 hours yet," I reminded her. "Rules are rules." She turned over and cried herself to sleep again. By Thursday, I was ready for a little peace and quiet. It was golf day, and I had cleared my afternoon for it. Unfortunately, the weather had other plans. Poured rain all day. On my way home, I spotted Carla, our neighbor, pulled over on the side of the road. She had a flat tire and was struggling with the jack. I parked behind her and jumped out to help. 10 minutes later, the tire was changed, but we were both completely soaked. "Come in for some coffee and lunch, Teddy," she said. "You cannot go home like this." I followed her inside, dripping water all over her floor. She took off her jacket, and I almost swallowed my tongue. Her white blouse clung to her like a second skin, and the lace of her bra was plain as day. Her body was incredible, and I had to tell myself to calm down. We laughed as we dried off, and I ended up telling her about Sarah's crazy plan. Carla chuckled, shaking her head. "I always liked you and Sarah. You are great neighbors. But honestly, if she does not straighten up, she is going to lose you." Her voice was soft as she added, "And Teddy, if things do not work out, just know that I could fall for a man like you." We stared at each other for a long moment before I finally gave in. We stripped off our wet clothes and ran for her shower. The hot water washed away the rain, and one thing led to another. We ended up in her bed, tangled together and laughing like kids. As I dressed to leave, Carla kissed me gently and whispered, "You and Sarah deserve to make this work, Teddy, but if it does not, come back to me. Anytime." When I got home, Sarah was waiting, arms crossed and eyes red from crying. She must have passed Carla's house and seen my car there. "You were late for dinner," she said softly. I shrugged. It was a long day. I gave her the best advice I could. Protect your assets. Close any joint credit lines immediately, pull half of the money from your shared savings, and put it in your own account. Take family heirlooms, jewelry, art, silver, and store them where he cannot find them. Track his movements. Hide a GPS in his car, activate the phone locator on his devices, and monitor his call history if you can. If you want more concrete answers, I can connect you to a private investigator. They will keep tabs on him, his car, or even his house if you need it. And one last thing, find a safe place to stay, maybe a relative or a friend, just in case things go sideways. Start keeping a journal too. Write down anything suspicious. It might help later. She stared at me for a long moment, a flicker of hesitation on her face, before she smiled and leaned forward. "What do you think about a revenge night?" she asked, her voice low. Her hand slipped into mine, and with the other, she undid one more button on her blouse, giving me a better view of what she was working with. I gently squeezed her hand and looked her square in the eye. "It is tempting, especially with the way my marriage looks right now, but you have not officially hired me yet. That means you are my client, and having revenge sex would be a conflict of interest." She raised an eyebrow and grinned. "Well, then you are fired." I had to laugh. "Okay, but before we proceed, I want you to be sure. A revenge night might feel good tonight, but tomorrow morning you might hate yourself. If you are wrong about his infidelity, there is no going back. You will be the one who ruins your marriage and ends up at fault in the divorce. Is that what you want?" Her sigh was heavy, like she had already made up her mind. "Can I rehire you later?" she teased. "Of course, but if I help you leave him and things still do not improve, you owe me one. When it is all over, we go out every night for a month to celebrate." That seemed to cheer her up. I left the pub feeling pretty good about myself. I had handled it with dignity and class. On my way home, I decided to grab a bottle of wine from the store. If I was going to spend the night alone, I might as well make it a little easier to swallow. At the checkout, a voice called out, "So, Lisa told me about you and Jenny. She said she has never seen anyone handle something like that so well." I turned and saw Tina smiling at me. Tina was one of Jenny's wild friends. But where Lisa was fun-loving, Tina was a professional player. She was the type of woman who made you earn your way into her good graces. With jewelry, expensive shoes, fur coats, or diamonds. You could take Tina on fancy dinners and luxury vacations for months and still not so much as hold her hand unless you stopped at Tiffany's first. The dress she wore looked like it cost at least $10,000, and it barely covered her curves. Her shoes, worth every penny, showcased legs toned enough to stop traffic. Pearls sat on her neck, diamond studs glimmered in her ears, and her wide-brimmed hat screamed money. "So," she said playfully, "now that you are free to play, how about playing with me?" I chuckled. "What concerns me, Tina, is your reputation." "My reputation? Darling, I am no crazier than Lisa. You had no problem with her. What is so special about me?" I grinned. "Because I know you, Tina. You told me yourself how you reel men in, get them hooked, and then take them on a shopping spree they can barely afford. I do not plan on being another tip in your collection." She narrowed her eyes but kept smiling. "So what is your proposal, Teddy?" "Here it is. If you want to see if Lisa's story is accurate, come with me to the Hilton right now. When we get there, you hand over those pearls and those diamond earrings as a tip. Then we will see where the night goes." Her hand flew to her necklace, her eyes flickering with hesitation. I almost laughed, but to her credit, she took a deep breath and replied, "Fine. If you are as good as Lisa says, you can keep the shoes." The Hilton was quiet and cozy, and breakfast the next morning was surprisingly great. I arrived at the office late, but I had no meeting scheduled, so it did not matter. There were over a dozen messages on my phone from Jenny. I sent her a quick text. "Everything is fine. I will see you over the weekend." Chris, as usual, caught on right away when I walked in. "You look like the cat that swallowed the cream," she said, smirking as I shared the story. Chris laughed so hard she nearly cried. That Friday night, I came home late to an empty house. Sarah was already out with Jessica and Tina for one of their infamous girls' nights. She had left a note. "I am upset you did not come home last night. You are not supporting me in this project, and we need to talk when I get back. Since you did not have the courtesy to call me, I will not be calling you tonight. Enjoy not knowing where I am for a change." I smiled as I folded the note. So that was the lesson I was supposed to learn. Huh? That I was supposed to sit around, pacing the house, worrying about what my wife was doing? Not a chance. 5 different women in 5 nights. All of them eager, most of them more than willing to take Sarah's place if things fell apart. I was not about to spend my Friday night fretting over the one woman who had rejected me last week. So I went to the city. My kids had gotten me into alternative rock, and Radio City had a lineup of 3 great bands. I grabbed a seat in the balcony, right by the aisle, and settled in. Before long, I was surrounded by a group of 20-somethings, adults technically, but to me they were kids. They teased me a bit, but one girl, with a bright smile and big brown eyes, joked, "You missed the Guy Lombardo concert, huh?" That made me laugh. When the music started, I stood up, sang, and danced right along with them. I knew every word to every song, and somehow, by the end of the night, I was the coolest guy in the crowd. When someone passed me a funny-looking cigarette, I did not say no. After the concert, the girl with the bright smile grabbed my hand. "You are coming with us," she declared. "I am too old for this," I protested, but they insisted. I will admit, I had another round in me. She would not stop. Sarah just kept talking, rambling on about how this experiment was supposed to bring us closer. In her mind, sharing experiences with other people would somehow reignite the passion between us. Like the anticipation would build until we could not keep our hands off each other. Now, let me tell you something. No man wants to sit and listen to that speech. It is like trying to listen to a lecture on taxes while a football game is playing in the background. The unofficial guide for husbands says you should start thinking about something completely unrelated. Throw in a well-timed "yes, dear" every 90 seconds, and let your mind wander. A full 10-minute speech? That is long enough to imagine a blonde with long legs and messy hair lying next to you, tangled up in the sheets. But what brought me back to reality, like ice water to the face, was when she said, "You should have." There it was. The most dangerous phrase a woman can use in any argument. You should have. Nothing good ever follows those words. I had options here. I could have ignored it and retreated back into my fantasy. Or I could have gone for a strong counter, something like, "Since when do you get to decide what I should do?" Or maybe the classic, "When did we agree to this nonsense?" But no, I took the easiest route. I looked at her and said simply, "You should." It stopped her mid-rant, her face scrunched up, baffled. I doubt she enjoyed hearing those 2 words any more than I enjoyed her idea of throwing our marriage to the wolves. I watched as the wheels turned in her head. For the first time, I could see her losing control. Sarah was realizing that her plan had backfired spectacularly. Her grand idea had been to control me, to push me into a corner where I was too weak or hurt to do anything but accept her new rules. Instead, she had discovered something unexpected. The man she thought was boring and predictable turned out to be very desirable to other women. My access to sex had not been rationed at all, it had exploded. Now the monopoly she once had was gone, handed over to women who were younger, bolder, and eager to take her place. And to make matters worse, all her new lovers apparently let her know how jealous they were of her for keeping such a man to herself for all these years. "Can we change our minds?" she finally asked, her voice soft. I shrugged.
I'm listening.
I was wrong, she admitted. Do you really think I'm just going to let you go? Right now? After all this? I leaned back, pretending to think about it. Truthfully, I wanted her back. I had always wanted her back. But I also knew better. If this happened once, what was stopping it from happening again? I think you are worried about what happens next, I said, watching her closely. You did not expect this outcome, did you? Fine. If you burn this contract, I will accept a new one. One that says everything you want. But you come back as my wife and only my wife. She tilted her head, searching my face. I agree. Of course she did. I had made her desperate enough to accept anything. But I was not about to let her off the hook that easily. I told her exactly what I wanted. Intimacy on my terms, anytime, anywhere, as long as it did not cause embarrassment. She blinked, surprised. It was not her favorite type of arrangement, but she nodded. Before it was over, she had agreed to all of it. She would wear sexy outfits for every major holiday, Christmas, New Year's, Valentine's Day, and even silly ones like Labor Day and Halloween. I threw in a few random ones for fun, like St. Patrick's Day, just to see if she would argue. She did not. I told her she would sleep naked every Friday night, no matter how cold it got. I made her promise to wear a French maid's outfit while cleaning the house every Saturday. I even added rules for long road trips. Every hour, a piece of clothing would come off. She agreed to it all. 15 minutes later, I handed her the new contract. It was much simpler than she expected. We, the undersigned, agree to love each other completely and remain exclusive until death. The events of the past week are forgiven but never forgotten, as a reminder of what we could lose. If either of us tries to step outside our vows again and no resolution can be found, the guilty party will forfeit all rights to property, assets, and financial benefits. Sarah read the contract slowly, probably looking for traps. There were none. She looked up at me and whispered, "So you do not want me to wear thongs and lace stockings every day?" I grinned. "Actually, I do. But this is about more than that. Do you agree?" "Yes," she said. "But only you. No one else comes close." "Good," I replied. "Now throw your old contract into the fireplace." She hesitated, then stood up, went upstairs, and returned with her copy. She threw it into the fire without a word. "Now we can go upstairs and make love," she said, a small smile on her face. I could not help but laugh. Really laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep inside.
No, darling.
We are still in the 48-hour cooling-off period. Her eyes narrowed, but before I could finish, she grabbed me, tore my clothes off, and threw me onto the floor. Nature took its course. From that day on, every time she said, "Honey, I have been thinking," I would smile and reply, "If it is not about going to bed with me, keep it to yourself." It might not be the advice in the husband's guide to keeping the peace, but let me tell you, it works for me. The next few days passed in a strange sort of peace. Sarah seemed determined to make amends. She followed through on her promises, showing up in outfits that would make any husband weak in the knees. I will admit, it was nice having my wife back in my corner again, even if the trust we had once shared was still hanging by a thread. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that this whole mess was behind us, but part of me stayed guarded. The problem with curiosity is that it does not go away easily. Once it is out in the open, it lingers like a bad smell, and for Sarah, that itch still needed scratching. Sure, she had burned the contract, and she was saying all the right things now, but something in her eyes told me she was not done exploring yet. So I gave her space. I figured if she wanted to test her boundaries again, I would be ready. I had learned a lot in the past few weeks, after all. I learned that no woman holds the keys to a man's happiness unless he hands them over. And I had no intention of giving Sarah that kind of power again. One evening, after work, I headed to the bar where Chris and I usually grabbed drinks when we needed to unwind. Chris was already sitting at a table, a glass of wine in front of her, and she gave me that smile, the one that let me know she was up to something. "Rough day?" she asked as I slid into the chair across from her. "Not too bad. How about you?" "Busy," But I have some news. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Your wife called me today. My heart stopped. What? Relax. She was asking for advice on throwing a big dinner party for your anniversary. Sounds like she wants to pull out all the stops. I blinked, stunned. Sarah? A dinner party? Chris nodded, a teasing glint in her eye. Looks like she is trying hard to win you over, Teddy. That news hit me harder than I expected. Part of me felt a flicker of hope, but another part of me wondered if this was just another act. A temporary fix for something that was broken far deeper than either of us wanted to admit. Chris must have sensed my hesitation because she reached across the table and touched my hand. Do not overthink it. Just enjoy the ride. Okay? If she messes up again, you will know what to do. The following Saturday, Sarah went into full Martha Stewart mode. She cooked all day, filled the house with candles and fresh flowers, and even set out her mother's antique china, something she had not used in years. When the guests arrived, I recognized most of the faces. Neighbors, friends from Sarah's book club, a few people from her office. Even Jessica showed up, although she kept her distance from me, which was probably for the best. She gave me one of her sly little smiles, but I ignored it. As the night wore on, Sarah stayed glued to my side. She laughed at my jokes, filled my wine glass before I even noticed it was empty, and hung on my every word. To anyone watching, we looked like the perfect couple, the kind of people who had it all figured out. But as I sat there, surrounded by friends and food and conversation, I realized something. I was not angry anymore. Sure, I was still hurt, but the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks had finally burned itself out. Sarah had made a mistake. There was no denying that, but she was trying. Maybe, just maybe, we could put this mess behind us and start fresh. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the house was quiet again, Sarah and I sat on the back porch with 2 glasses of whiskey. The candles were still flickering inside, casting soft shadows across the yard. Thank you for tonight, I said finally, breaking the silence. She looked at me surprised. For what? For trying. I know you did not have to do all this. Sarah took a slow sip of her drink, staring out into the darkness. I almost lost you, Teddy. That scared me more than anything. You still might, I replied, my voice steady. Trust takes time to rebuild. You know that. She nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. I know, but I am willing to do whatever it takes. I meant what I said before. I do not want to lose you. For the first time in weeks, I believed her. Over the next month, things started to settle down. Sarah stuck to her promises. No more surprises. No more exploring. And for my part, I did something I had not done in years. I let my guard down. We started taking day trips to little towns we had always talked about visiting. We went to baseball games, saw a ballet, which was torture for me but worth it to see her smile, and even took a ballroom dancing class. Turned out Sarah had 2 left feet, but we laughed through it anyway. On Friday nights, she would slip into one of those ultra-hot outfits she had promised me, and we would spend the evening together like newlyweds. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were both in the marriage again. 2 people choosing each other, day after day. But life has a funny way of testing you when you least expect it. It happened on a Thursday. I had just gotten back from the golf course when my phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. Teddy, I need to talk. Can we meet? I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether or not to reply. Jessica had been quiet ever since the night in my office, and I had assumed she was done stirring up trouble. But now, here she was again. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a little cafe downtown. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table in the corner, sipping a glass of wine. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down across from her. What is this about, Jessica? I asked, cutting straight to the point. She smiled, but it was not the sly, teasing smile I was used to. This time, she looked almost sad. I wanted to apologize, she said quietly, for everything. I never should have gotten involved in your marriage. I frowned, not sure where this was going. Why now? Because I see what you and Sarah are trying to rebuild, and I do not want to be the reason it falls apart again. I studied her for a moment, trying to decide if she was being sincere. Jessica was a lot of things, but she was not usually one to admit when she was wrong. Finally, I nodded. Thank you. I appreciate that. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the table. What is this? I asked. Just something you might want to see. I opened the envelope and pulled out a single photograph. My heart stopped. It was Sarah, sitting at a table in what looked like a hotel bar. Across from her was a man I did not recognize, his hand resting on hers as they leaned in close, talking. Jessica watched me carefully. I did not want to show you this, Teddy, but I thought you deserved to know.